Hey guys, so it is the week of Thanksgiving here and cranberries are still on sale at the grocery store. I'm going to be making up some unsweetened cranberry juice with these ones. The first thing I need to do is get them washed up and then added to a stock pot with water to bring them up to a boil until the skins burst on the cranberries. I also have this frozen grape juice that I made last year from homegrown grapes. I'm going to be getting those to thaw on the stove. Now that the cranberry skins have burst in the water, I'm going to run them through our food mill and also a wire mesh strainer. The goal is to have as much of the juice as possible without any seeds or skin in there. I went ahead and stored these in our fridge. It allows for the pulp to settle to the bottom and it breaks up the process a little bit by being able to store things in our refrigerator and then come back to it like a day or so later. When I'm able to finish it up, it really helps to keep me from not being so overwhelmed with getting all of these projects done. The next day, I pulled the juice from the fridge. All the pulp had settled to the bottom of the jars and I poured just the juice portion back into the pot. I did save the pulp because I had an idea to use it later for something else. I'm going to get the cranberry juice heated up. The recipe I used did not use enough water. I used the wrong recipe. I have two, and one of them has a good cranberry juice recipe and the other one doesn't. And of course I used the wrong one. The one I used doesn't add nearly enough water when boiling the cranberries, so it makes the juice more of a syrup. The other recipe uses plenty of water, and it's very similar to the juice that you would buy from the grocery store. I ended up adding several cups of water to this one to thin it out. Doing that made it the perfect consistency while still having a very strong cranberry flavor. This is unsweetened cranberry juice, and it's such a pretty color in the jars. I get those over to my electric water bath canner, and they process for about 15 minutes. And then I let them cool for like 5 minutes or so in the canner before I move them over to a towel on our countertop, where they'll sit for a day or so before I test the seals. The next morning, I was going to make the grape jelly and some crusty bread using the sourdough starter that I have. I reheated the grape juice that we kept in the fridge, and I got it cooked down on the stove with some sugar. While that was heating up, I checked the seals on the cranberry juice jars. Everything looks great, so I just label them, remove the bands, and then they'll get stored in our pantry. I also am making up some fresh bread today using our sourdough starter and just using the basic white crusty bread recipe that I have with the sourdough starter in place of the yeast. It's flour, warm water, salt, and a cup of the sourdough starter. I get that all mixed together with a towel on top and put into a warm place to sit most of the day. I added a candy thermometer to the grape juice just so I could get it to the gelling point a little bit quicker than I normally do with just the spoon test. And I just waited for it to get to about 220 degrees, which is the gelling point for the jelly. Also this morning, the kids wanted hard-boiled eggs for breakfast, and I thought it would be a good chance to show how I make hard-boiled eggs. We get our fresh eggs to peel very easily by boiling them for 10 to 12 minutes and then moving them quickly to an ice cold water bath. And then the shells peel right off very easily. They slide right off with the pad of my thumb. They're fresh eggs. I know there's so many different techniques for peeling eggs easily, but this has always worked well for me, whether they're fresh eggs or a little bit older. Doesn't really matter as long as they go immediately from the boiling water to ice cold water. Back over to the grape jelly. It started to foam up quite a bit. I did add a little tiny bit of butter. Just a little bit of fat to the jelly or jam when it's foaming will reduce the foam very quickly. Once it got to 220 degrees, I reduced the heat and filled our jelly jars. was able to get 3 jelly jars filled with grape jelly made with our homegrown grapes here, and I'm super excited about it. Last year was our very first year of being able to harvest the grapes here, and I'm glad that I made juice from them and got it into the freezer, because unfortunately this year we were not able to get any grapes. The birds got to all of them, and it's because I did not cover them like I did last year. So I'm gonna have to remember to put bird netting over the grapes next year. I moved those jars over to the water bath canner, and those take 10 minutes to process, followed by another 5 minutes to cool slightly before moving them onto a towel. Later on that day, I ended up using the pulp that was left over from when I canned up cranberry juice to make a cranberry orange vinegar. The first thing I had to do was get all of that pulp back into the stock pot to get it heated through. I made a spice bag with cheesecloth. I put whole cloves and cinnamon sticks in it, got them bundled together with butcher's twine and put off to the side to add to the pot later. The next thing I needed to do was strain out all of the juice that I was able to from the pulp. In small batches, I strained the pulp using cheesecloth, the mesh strainer, and a lot of patience. While I was waiting, I ended up moving that bread dough over to our Dutch oven just to get it to rise in the Dutch oven before I bake it later. I was able to get about 8 cups of juice from all of that pulp, and I added it back to the stock pot with the cinnamon and clove spice bag with some sugar. Now, the recipe called for a lot of white wine vinegar to go with 8 cups of cranberry juice. The recipe was based on 1 cup of cranberry juice, and to that you add 3 cups of white wine vinegar. Well, I had 8 cups of cranberry juice, so I did not have enough of that, but I did have a gallon of distilled white vinegar. So I just used that. The ratio wasn't exactly the same, but the vinegar turned out great. At that point, I just went ahead and I added the gallon of distilled white vinegar. I got the vinegar and juice mixed together with sugar and let that cook together with the spice bag on the stove, giving it time to infuse all those warm flavors of cinnamon clove. It smells so good. Even though it's vinegar cooking on the stove, it still smelled really good. A bit later, I added about 2 cups of washed fresh cranberries. I also needed orange segments to add to the canning jars. All I had were those clementines that we always keep in our fridge, so I got 3 of those peeled and separated. I canned up some quart size and pint size jars. Each jar got some of those orange segments and cranberries in with all the vinegar. We had an activity scheduled that day with our kids, and I only had 45 minutes left before we had to leave. And in that time, I needed to can up the quarts and the pints. My initial plan was to do 2 separate rounds, but I quickly realized I would not have time for that. So I fit as many of the pint-sized jars that I could in with the quarts, which left me with only 1 pint size left over. I processed all of those for 15 minutes in the water bath canner, also adding another 5 minutes before moving them to the large towel on my counter. After we returned home, it was much later. We did already eat dinner at that point, but I remembered that I had that bread that needed to be baked. It's a fairly quick process baking these crusty breads. It's no more than like a half hour covered in a 450-degree oven, and then another 5 to 10 minutes uncovered to get a nice golden color on top. We didn't cut into this one until the next day, but it was one of my favorites that I've made. It had a great sourdough flavor and was super airy and delicious. But that is going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time. Bye!